My name is Roger Armstrong, and I was born a psychic child in 1930. And I was trained to focus and develop abilities by my imaginary playmate. He had me call him guardian. And he's visited me throughout my long life. Now, so I was trained at 3, and I'm 87. Almost. Yeah, I'll be 87 in June. So, now, in the realities and talking about them, I'm more of a philosopher. But this is my experience as a philosopher. Most of our world perceives reality in 2 forms. One form is a one dimension, starting with a premise and a straight line to a conclusion. And that's what we train our children to do. And that's the basis of our contemporary society. And we call it logic. Now, there is another reality close to that is able to show depth. And it shows depth by having the line AB go at an angle. So you have A, B, C, D. And that angle, to our perception, shows us depth. Now, in the 3D dimensionality that we see in photographs, primarily, was developed in the 1400s and the 1500s during the Renaissance in Italy. Until that point, all painting was done either in 1 or 2D. Now, for instance, the Mona Lisa isn't famous for the portrait. It's famous for the perspective that Leonardo added that diminished objects in the distance. That's the importance of that. Now, in isometric drawing, that's the 2D at an angle, the measurement of objects in the distance doesn't change. The row of telephone poles that's often used as an example of 3D, of the telephone poles getting smaller and smaller and smaller as they go into the distance, or the railroad tracks that are wide next to us and come to a point in the far distance. Okay. The 2D I call a measured reality, because in the 2D reality, the telephone poles don't change size. You just have more of the same size going off into the distance. There used to be, and I don't know if it still is or not, in our education, there was a test developed by, I think, Victor D'Amico. I met him. He was a very interesting man. He tested children at different ages to see what their perception level was. And he developed the different stages of perception. Now, as an art teacher, I taught K through 12 at a small university school that was a laboratory school. And by laboratory, I mean we used experimental techniques in teaching. And we've monitored it carefully and monitored and measured the IQ of students as they entered the school. And they developed a perfect bell curve. Children with a low IQ going up to a high IQ or an average IQ, and then dropping and then raising down the other half of the bell curve into the high IQs. Now, I have an example of the difference between the two-dimensional and three-dimensional. It's a row of glasses. And that was part of D'Amico's testing. Draw a glass of water. And most people would draw a rectangle and a wiggly line. Then there were some people that would draw it three-dimensionally. And they would draw an oval and an oval, connect the sides, and put an oval and wiggle lines to show where the water was. Now, if you line the glasses up, the isometric drawing, the glasses were all the same size, like 8 of them, but all the same size, one overlapping the other. In the 3D, the first glass was the largest, and they diminished in size as they went back. I had some students, when I taught this at this school, I had to warn the janitor that I was going to teach three-dimensional design today. And he'd have buckets outside my classroom and mops because it would upset the kids' basic conditioning so much they would get sick and throw up. So I learned that not to jump from just one dimension, but to add isometric drawing into showing them how, explaining to them how they see other dimensions. And that kind of was the bridge then to three-dimensional, and the kids no longer got sick. The janitors were very grateful. All right. Now, then you enter the contemporary equation of fourth dimensional. Now, fourth dimension is in perception is represented as a mirror image of the three-dimension reality. So if you look at yourself in a mirror, the reflection that you see basically is a fourth dimensional reality. Now, many authors have picked up on this, and so you have people coming out of the mirror or people going into the mirror into that reality, other reality, and makes great speculation in those terms. Now, one dimension and two dimensions are static. In other words, once you see the dimension of the first glass of water, the last glass of water is the same size. So that's static perception. Now, in the 3D, it gets smaller and smaller, and therefore reality changes. And becomes fluid. This is the reality that artists use. Because in their mind, they're able to create new realities that are not in the one or two dimensional form, but in the three or fourth dimensional form. Now, some artists, as modern artists, and I'm sure you've seen these, they mix the two together. And so as the two-dimensional, they'll show a table with place settings on the table, but they'll show a top view of it. And then they'll have people sitting in a chair next to that table, and you just see their side view. And the chair is just side view with only two legs showing. They don't show all four legs. And people were amazed at their perception that they could mix the two together. Now, the fourth dimension then is ever changing and is creating. And from that you can create. Because you can take elements from here, from there, and reassemble them. Now, as a professor teaching perception at Purdue in the 60s, I was able to use remote viewing to see how the minds of the students functioned when they were thinking of the different dimensions. Now, if you've seen the RV video, you know that most of the spy networks around the world in different countries use remote viewing to see the outsides of things. Where going into a painting with my students and training them to go into a painting or into a book, into a musical composition, there are little tabs left by the author on decisions that the author has made. You touch that tab inside the painting mentally. You touch that tab and it explains to you why it's there. So if you want to know why Einstein selected his famous equation, you can go into his work and touch that tab and he'll explain why he went to that. Yeah. And not all of it is correct. All of his assumptions are correct, especially the one on time. Okay. Now, so 3D is ever changing. You look in one direction and things diminish in the distance. You walk towards them and they get larger. So our whole three-dimensional reality is constantly moving and changing. Now, that's a good thing, because that allows us then to create then our own realities using the fourth dimension. And that's what an artist does. Now, there are four basic realities that we deal with, other than just this visual one. One is believing. People have told us that we admire or that are authority figures, and we believe it as a one-dimensional thing. That's the basic of the premise and the conclusion. And in believing, you don't need the premise. All you get is the conclusion. But if the person is knowledgeable enough, it'll stick with you. Now, interestingly, as the child gets older, most of their belief system is solid by the time they're 8 or 10 years old. And between 8 and 10, their peer group's opinions become beliefs. And outweigh that of the parents or the teachers. The peer group becomes most important. All right. So, one is believing without any substantial backing. Next is seeing. And we have that saying, seeing is believing. That's not always true. You can see illusions that take place, reflections of an object through heat rays rising, for instance. Now, there's a movie called Something Wild, or the approximate title, and I was an extra in that movie. Never got on camera, but my car did. And my car was a red Volkswagen, 4-door, not a Beetle. And they had it come up a hill with the heat rays rising. And it looked like a cartoon car with big tires, small body, and it changed. As it came up the hill and came into the flat, it became a recognizable car. Now, the director used this image to change the intention of the film from a comedy to more of a dramatic series and introduce Ray Liotta as the villain. You know, interesting that he used the perception to change the attitude. Now, the police, in getting descriptions from people who saw the incident, have learned that everybody sees it a little bit differently. And there's no one cohesive view. They have to put them all together and then make an assumption. Because what the people saw was influenced by their experience. So they weren't seeing a true reality. They weren't seeing a general true reality. They were seeing their experiential reality and plugging it in. And that's what our conscious mind does. One of the purposes of the conscious mind is to take something we don't know and twist it around and identify it to something we do know. So if you see a man floating through the air, you put wings on him and make him an angel. It's a natural reaction. Now, the third one is knowing. I know I put my keys in that drawer. Who took them out? I know I put them there. And then you start searching. There's a story that an East Indian philosopher tells about being on a train. And the conductor comes by and asks him for his ticket. And he says, oh, I have it. It's in my pocket. And it's not there. It's not in this pocket. He starts searching the other passengers for his ticket. He looks underneath it. He goes through his luggage and he can't find his ticket. And the conductor looks at him and says, sir, most people put their ticket in their upper right-hand pocket or left-hand pocket. Oh, I know, the philosopher says, but if it's not there, I've lost all hope. I like that story. But it illustrates very nicely the knowing. Now, the fourth dimension is the knock-knock. Or the fourth reality, I should say, is the knock-knock. It's real. I can touch it, I can hit it, I can hear it. I look in a mirror, I can see it. Okay. It's existing and it's solid. All right, we have two kinds of department stores. One is cyber on the internet, and the other is a brick and mortar depicting the solid reality of the store. Fun how we twist and use things.